This podcast is rated S for spoilers. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Half Past Podcast. This is episode 93, the movie review of Onward. I'm Graham Ricks, and here with me is my friend and co-pilot Ian Jones.
In quarantine, baby.
Yeah, right? We have been in quarantine for...
5? I don't know.
You're 35 now?
Yeah, it's...
Oh, jeez.
It's good. It's good to see your face. There's at least another month of it here.
Oh my gosh,
Washington.
man. Yeah, you're in Washington, so that's like where everything started.
Right,
like
yeah.
It was just like, that's where all of this just started spreading throughout the United States, so I thought it was real interesting. I hadn't talked to you in a while, and I texted you the other day, and I was just like, hey, you holding up all right?
You alive?
He said, yeah.
Barely. I mean, we haven't had to eat anyone yet, so that's good.
Nice.
It's been an introvert's dream, really.
Oh, right?
You know, the nation is freaking out over a virus that essentially targets extroverts.
Right?
So...
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I remember I've talked to probably a few coworkers, and they were talking about how their life hasn't really changed much.
Wow, I would love to just slap them. Because they're just staying indoors, or
yeah,
are they ignoring?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
They normally, this is their normal lives.
Right.
Like, they stay indoors. They don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. Right. So, the only time they ever leave and do anything is when they go to, the grocery store, which is the same, you're doing the same thing. Yeah. There's just less product on the shelves. Oh, man. I just thought that was so interesting. It's
right. Okay, that's good. I thought I was going to have to start slapping some people. Our lives haven't really changed. What? As in what, you're ignoring everything?
Right? So, this whole thing has been crazy for me. So, I actually went on vacation right before all of this went to heck, just went to hell. And so, I actually was out and about. And you were, too. You had gone on, your little honeymoon, before.
Annie and I were on our honeymoon. We had a discussion because it was starting to blow up. It was a problem in Washington.
It was starting, yep.
We had a discussion about are we gonna tell people because by nature Annie kind of sticks to herself anyway, and so it wasn't but we were at Disneyland, so we were surrounded by an awful lot of people, and there was a different feeling there. It was totally worth it to go and check out Rise of the Resistance and the new ride
Galaxy's
and
Edge thing.
Galaxy's Edge. Yeah, I was struggling to come up with the name. So we spent most of our time there just because we felt at home. But there was a feeling inside the park, even though it was packed. You could just tell that people were trying to keep to themselves, and everyone was really washing their hands for a lot longer. Yep. I can remember complaining to you about how much I hate going into men's bathrooms at movie theaters, because a lot of times you'll see guys just use the bathroom and then walk the restroom out.
And walk right out. Yep.
And
this is a problem amongst any kind of public thing. Yeah, apparently there are numerous men who do that, and I don't understand. I don't get it.
It's baffling to see.
Wash your damn hands.
And the thing is, I'm not the cleanliest person,
Yeah.
In general, I'm just my desk is always messy and stuff like that. But I mean, there's really basic things that you got to do, and that's always been discussed. I've always been dumbfounded and I see it so often, but I noticed I wasn't seeing it when we were on our honeymoon at Disneyland. That was one thing I was not seeing. Every guy was...
Yep. I absolutely noticed that too, because the few times that I've been out and about in public, back when I could go out and about in public, I would definitely notice that there's like, well, crap, men are actually... Everyone is actually washing their hands, and they're turning the faucet off with the paper towel, type of thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, all of that stuff was happening, and that happened. I was noticing that when I went on my vacation, because you went on your vacation, and then I went almost immediately after you, because I was even trying to get in contact with you, because we could have met up had we gone the same week, but you went the first week, and I went the very next week. And so the very next week, I went on vacation, and we were supposed to go to San Diego. And San Diego, by the time when we got to San Diego, everything closed down. Like they immediately closed everything down. And so we were already there, and we're just like, well, what the heck? What are we gonna do? We have this hotel. Like, what are we gonna do? And so we ended up canceling the hotel. And after we canceled the hotel, we were like, well, crap, we're already out here. Let's just keep going. So we actually turned around the other way. We ended up going northeast. So we ended up in South Dakota.
Oh, my God.
Right? So we ended up in South Dakota because we were actually, visiting national parks. It's the thing that Jackie and I do, as a couple. We've been, her goal is to see 100% of the national parks in the U.S. So, we were like, well, since we can't do the thing we were going to do in San Diego, let's just go through, let's try to visit some of these national parks. And so we ended up going all the way to South Dakota and went to a couple of national parks up there, and then we were going to come back down to Colorado, see one there, and then come back around to San Diego and then back to Phoenix because we had dropped her dog off at her aunt's. And while this was happening, this is when America started burning. So, we were, on and about, and so by the time we had, left, made this decision and left, we were both thinking, crap, we probably should not have left. We should have went right back home. Yeah. But we were, already in the middle of the country. And so we were just like, well, crap. It was such a weird experience to watch. We'd be at a hotel, and we'd look at the news, and you could just see the numbers just, increasing. And then you start seeing governors shutting states down, and I'm just like, what the heck is happening, man? And even one of the cities we went into, it ended up being, Moab, Utah, of all places.
Oh, wow.
Moab, Utah, we were there, and they had this whole COVID thing while we were there, where they were talking about how they had the city council had met everything, and they were just like, there's 0 cases. We've done some testing. So far, there's 0 reported cases in this city. And we left. We stayed there, and then we left because we continued on our trip. And a day or two after they left, Moab closed their city down. They were like, nope, no one in or out. Nobody in or out. And I was just like, this is crazy. It was such a weird experience to be doing this thing that we shouldn't be doing, which is traveling. And then seeing what happened. We're just like, oh my gosh. All this is everybody's saying to stay at home. States are closing. It was just such a crazy experience. And so Jackie and I, because we're every other person that I know, we buy groceries weekly. And we buy supplies weekly. So we were hoping that by the time we got back, because we were gone for a whole week, we were gone for 10 days. We were hoping by the time we got back, everything would have been chill. But that's not what happened. Right. So we got home and just for some weird reason, toilet paper, I don't know. I have no idea why toilet paper is just non-existent anymore.
They could have stopped this part of it. The freaking out right away by just limiting how many...
Oh, yep.
Had that just happened from the very beginning.
From the very beginning, that would have limited it.
There wouldn't be an issue with toilet paper and getting bottled water. Because the truth is, you're just not going through it that much. I mean, even if
you're not going through it that fast.
Day, I mean, it's...
Yeah.
It's absurd. So I mean,
it is absurd.
So it's one of those things where you need a situation like this in order to lay down guidelines for how things need to be handled in the future, for sure.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, and I hope that happens. I hope that we, as a country, decide that here's the steps that we need to take, and when the next pandemic happens. So it's just been crazy. It has been a really crazy experience, and I remember the first time I knew it was a crazy experience is right before I left. Because I left on like Friday or Saturday. I think it was Saturday morning, early Saturday morning. We left. I went to pool league. I went to pool league on Wednesday, right? So like that was the bar was still open, right. The pool hall was still open. I went to pool league. They were just like, don't do the customary handshake before and after. Wash your hands before each match, so on and stuff like that. That was like what we did. And then while I was on there on Wednesday, that night, because it's a bar, it's a bar / pool hall, there's obviously like ESPN or something up, right? And so that was when I found out that NCAA was like, well, we're playing to empty crowds. And I was just like, what? They're going to play the championship to empty crowds? That's crazy. And then after that, the next story was that the NBA had decided to just suspend the season. And I was just like, what? And then after that, the very next day was Thursday, and that's when Trump was like, national emergency. And so we were just like, what the hell is happening? It had gotten like, it went so fast. I swear within like Wednesday to Wednesday that week, when I was gone, it like got exponentially crazier. And it was such a weird experience to be out and about and like see this happening. And like Jackie and I were like, while this was happening, we were trying our best. We had luckily had hand sanitizer from previously, and we had hand wipes from previously. And then we were just like trying our best to like keep everything and like wash our hands and not touch anything. And I remember that it was so weird because we're going to national parks and going into like small towns and driving through most of the major cities. We probably encountered maybe like 30 people during that entire trip, maybe. And so it was like really weird. It was strange. It was really a weird experience. It was interesting. And so it's just been a crazy experience, this whole thing. And with all that said, the segue we have here is I watched Onward. See, here we go. I got it. So Onward, I watched Onward like probably, it had to have been like a month ago. I watched it over the first weekend it came out. So whenever week that is, that was when I went to go see Onward. And so I actually got to go to the movie theater to see this movie. And that was the last time I've seen this movie. And so what ended up happening is we had this huge delay. And so we're doing this podcast now. But it was so weird because now everything's closed and you can't even see, all the theaters are closed. So you can't see anything. So it's interesting that this movie they decided to release it digitally onto Disney Plus.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's amazing because we would have gone, Annie and I, we would have gotten back from our honeymoon and we would have done date night. That's like one of her favorite things to do is go to the movie theaters. But the movie theaters here had already been closed for some time, so that wasn't even an option. And I didn't even realize until you told me this morning that, hey, it's been a while since I've seen this movie. I was just like, well, what do you mean? I just saw it 2 days ago when it came out on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, that's right. It did have like 1 week at the box office before. It was in
the box week for 2 weeks. And during that, and I saw it the very first week. And the thing that's interesting about this movie is I think cost about I think they estimated on the high end about $200 million to make. And it made like a little over $100 million in those 2 weeks, which is pretty good, considering a lot of people were already stemming from going. Like people were already choosing not to go to the movie theaters when it first came out. And it was only in there for 2 weeks, and then it obviously suffered the box office obviously suffered, but it still made over 100 million, which is impressive considering people weren't going, and it basically got taken off in 2 weeks. It was just like gone from theaters. So it's so crazy.
You know, I'll say this. I read a really fascinating article, and I meant to send it to you, but it was the case being made that this is the time, this is the situation that is actually going to bring drive-in movies back to life.
Man, I can imagine that being a thing.
Well, I mean, you gotta wonder how many people after this are going to be too freaked out. You know, eventually everything will get back to normal. But I just, I thought, I was like, you know, that's a really good point. But I don't, you know, they closed down for the same reason that would knock them out after a year.
Yeah,
of business anyway. But what an amazing thing that, like, you know, our kids are not going to be able to ever experience. No, you know, that was like such a fun thing, and it's like gone forever now. But this is the kind of this is the kind of thing that could bring it back if, you know, if we have an entire generation of kids who are too paranoid to go anywhere.
It's true, and going to the drive-in theater was a common thing pretty much since like the 50s, the 60s, you know, and it was like a common thing to go to the theater, to a drive-in theater, and see movies, and they started closing down in the late 90s, and so when we were kids, I mean, I definitely saw a ton of drive-in movies, and the thing that's interesting from where I grew up in Tulsa is Tulsa had a lot of drive-in theaters. It was like, that was like one of the things that Tulsa had like the most in the country or something like that. It was like really weird. I mean, there for some strange reason, there was like a lot of drive-in theaters in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they, and so it was really common for me to go, like we would like get like a pizza and just like watch the movie.
That's awesome.
Or whatever. Yeah, it was great. It was like one of my fond memories from childhood. And so I think it's interesting that you say that, because this morning I was looking up Onward because I haven't seen this movie in such a long time, that I was like, well, let me look this up and kind of refresh my memory of this movie. And it said that, you know, it had a COVID-19 warning up, and there was one showing, and it was like tonight at a drive-in theater, the only one left, I believe, in Glendale. In Arizona, like the only one left.
Oh my goodness!
Arizona.
Wow.
Yeah.
It
was pretty interesting. Yeah, and it was like one showing or something like that, and I was just like, "What? How's it even there?" I just thought it was so strange.
Well, so speaking of Oklahoma, I know we've gone really long, but you and I haven't had a chance to catch up. That's an awesome RoboCop shirt, by the way.
Oh yeah, thank you.
But since you brought up...
This is radio, so nobody can see how awesome it is.
God, it is really cool. You've been wearing some cool shirts to these podcasts lately. Okay, so since you brought up Oklahoma, I have to ask if you use this time wisely and binge the Tiger King documentary.
Oh my gosh.
It's just...
I've been wanting, you know, because of where I'm from, all my friends are from there. And so on Facebook, they've just been posting like all this ridiculous stuff from Tiger King.
Bananas. It's crazy. Like, you couldn't, like, after the first couple episodes, you're like, this can't get any crazier. And then it's crazier with each passing episode. It's so bananas. There's no way any of it could be real. And it's all real. If it was in a movie, you would be like, this is the most ludicrous thing. Someone is going to do a Tiger King movie. When Hollywood comes back to work, that's going to happen.
Nice.
And I doubt that they could even dramatize it more than what it is.
Right?
There's no way.
Unbelievable, man. I've been trying to watch that. I keep telling Jackie, I'm like, you know what, we should watch Tiger King, and she's like, no. I want, because like it's always something I want to do while we're doing something else. She's like, no. I want to focus on this really ridiculous thing. And so we haven't watched it yet. Okay. And so we've been spending most of our time playing Animal Crossing on the Switch, which has been so much fun. It's like so much fun.
The kids play that too.
It's a fun little game, man. It's like a really weird, grindy game, you know? Like, but it's that calming type of grinding. You're just like fishing and like digging up stuff, and, you know, planting stuff, watering. Like, it's just like you're just like real calm the whole time. It's a peaceful grind. And so since we can't go anywhere, we've been playing that like pretty much consecutive. Like, we haven't done anything else. It's great. It's been a good time. Oh man! All right, we've gone so far into this.
Yes.
So let's just go right into Onward here. So let's get into the synopsis. So, two elven brothers embark on a quest to bring their father back for one day. This movie is directed by Dan Scanlon, who did Monsters University, and for the life of me, I can't remember which one he co-directed also. I think it was like one of the Disney movies, not the Pixar animated movies, but it was one of the Disney animated movies that he co-directed, which is what you and I have talked about a lot. They do that often. They usually have one of those guys co-direct something, and they kind of like them, and then they'll come on and they'll direct their own. It's an industry thing that we've seen forever.
Yeah, I mean, animation. It takes so much work to do the animated films anymore. There's just so many scenes that you have to have two people, you know.
Yeah. Yep. So it's been interesting to see a lot of these guys that kind of co-direct and then they'll direct. So every time you see a co-director in one of these movies, just expect that they'll probably get one by themselves some other time. It just seems how it always happens. This movie starring Tom Holland as Ian Lightfoot, who is probably best known for Spiderman. He was also in The Current War, and he was also in Spies in Disguise that came out, last December with Will Smith. Do you remember that?
I do remember it. We didn't go see it.
That movie looked rough. I heard that it was like okay, and I thought that's what it would have been at best, just by looking at the trailer.
Sounds like a Will Smith animated movie. It's just okay.
I mean, it's starting to turn into Will Smith in general, man. It's so weird to see somebody like Will Smith, who was such a box office draw from the 90s into like pretty much the early 2000s. And then after that, he's just like progressively been going down. Like, he's not been doing great movies for a while now, and it's really upsetting.
I just think the amount of competition for summer blockbusters and the criteria for what makes something successful has just changed so much that, you kind of wonder if a star's name even matters anymore. It's just how much buzz can you get around a film? Like, there are certainly stars, like Chris Pratt, and Tom Holland, who were like blowing up, but that doesn't necessarily, doesn't necessarily mean people will go to see it. But they're absolutely going to go see a Spider-Man movie.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who the web slinger is, although I do think Tom's the best one they've had.
Oh yeah, he's easily the best one they've had, and I think it's real difficult to. I think just the superhero films in general has really soaked up a lot of the box office.
Yeah, a lot of the
especially
real
during the
estate.
summer.
Yeah,
and I think that's really tough for other people trying to get movies out. So he's also starring Chris Pratt as Barley Lightfoot. He was in Parks and Rec. He's obviously Star-Lord and from Jurassic World. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who's Laurel Lightfoot, she's best known for probably Seinfeld, but she was also in SNL for a while. She was in SNL for years. And also the new show Veep, which I don't know if is Veep still showing?
I don't know. I've seen a few episodes of it. I know that the critics love it.
Yeah, the critics love it.
It's
I've seen
It's an
only
okay
a couple
show,
episodes. Yeah, I've only seen a couple episodes either, so it might be one of those where you have to watch a lot to like kind of embrace it. Octavia Spencer as the Manticore, who was in The Help, Hidden Figures, and The Shape of Water. Mel Rodriguez as Colt Bronco, who was in Getting On and The Last Man on Earth. And then there's Kyle Bornheimer as Wilden Lightfoot, who was in Worst Week, and he was like has a reoccurring role on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And that's pretty much all the stars, man. So let's get right into Quirks and Likes. We're getting right into Quirks and Likes, right. Jones. And I was going to make you go first because I haven't seen this movie in a while.
You gotta give me some time to think of Quirks.
Oh, man. So when I went to go see this movie, I saw this movie a while ago, and I remember when I left the movie theater, I distinctly remember because we were planning on doing this one, and yes. I had watched it, and I knew you were going on vacation, and so there was going to be a little bit of a delay, and especially since I was going right after you, so there was going to be a delay on this one anyway. And then with all the COVID stuff, it just got pushed even further back. So with all that said, I ended up leaving this movie theater, and I remember like all of my quirks being like the tiniest little things, and I remember them just being really kind of minor things, like how it had that same kind of issue where man, what movie was that? There's the animated movie with dang it, for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of that movie. But it has the problem that movie had, which was the convenience. Everything was very convenient with when his magic actually worked and when it didn't work. So he's struggling during the entire movie how to embrace this, because they make a distinction that you almost have to be born with the spark to be able to get this to work. And it's convenient that he's the one that's able to do it. And he's struggling through it through the whole movie. But every time he needs to use it, it works out for him. And I remember that just like bothered me just a little bit. But that's like such a minor little thing. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah, and that was the problem I had. There's just a lot of these little scenes where I'm like, okay, so they need to figure out a way to get through this boat, so they decide to do the enlargement spell to get the cheese puff to work. And it was scenes like that where I'm like, well, that's convenient that this enlargement spell worked here, as opposed to when they were trying to do the gas can, it backfires and it like makes him small. You know.
Well, you could, I suppose, make the argument that maybe magic should only work when you absolutely need it to. Right?
Well, that is definitely an important distinction.
But yes, had it worked properly then, or had it worked properly in just forming his father completely. Yes. But
yeah, right?
There's never, there's no adventure then, right?
No, yeah, so. Which is why it's a minor thing.
Right.
It's like having these little complaints about it. It reminds me of like somehow we managed to go back to Star Wars every time on these podcasts, but it's like the example of The Last Jedi, where when they're on the planet, where you have Finn and Rose on the planet, and they're like, well, everything they did there was insignificant. And I'm like, well, if you take that out, then there's like, that's half the movie. There's no adventure. There's nothing for them to accomplish.
Right. Oh, the pointless side quests.
Yeah. And the thing is there's a lot of movies that have pointless side quests. The advantage to this movie is they talk about that, because there's so many references to Dungeons and Dragons in this movie. And so that's a part of playing an RPG, is doing some of these side quests that don't always progress the story. So it was kind of interesting seeing those little references through there.
Very.
But I remember distinctly, man, I remember when I was watching this movie, that was one of my biggest things, and it was such a minor thing because I actually did enjoy this movie a lot. So that was like all I had. That was all I could think of when I left the movie theater. So I'm swinging it to you, man.
Oh, wow. Okay. Amazingly, I don't have a whole lot of quirks, and this is a movie where I kind of want to see it again because it's so jam packed with a lot of neat little references, but there are a couple of things that I think I can throw on the table. The first one being that for the first third of this movie, so essentially like the first act or so, I really didn't like Barley, and
that is fair.
And the thing is, as you watch this movie, you start to realize what has to happen before it happens, because they're losing so much time with their father, and then you realize that these two brothers are on this journey together, but they both have different arcs. Both of them have two different arcs. And at the start of the movie, you want Ian to see his father. You know, that's the thing that you're really rooting for. But as soon as you find out what Barley's biggest regret is, it becomes clear that they're burning all this time just to get to the stone. And it starts to become clear as you're watching it that only one of them is going to be able to see their father, and it's probably only going to be for a few minutes because just the clock is times against them.
Yes,
and so it's at that point where it's like, okay, I kind of get it. It's this is his. Barley's journey is different from Ian's. They both need two different things. They both have different arcs that they need to follow for this story to happen. So
their arcs interlap mid story, like you're saying when they at the very beginning. Ian needs to see his father, but you realize that Barley is the one that actually needs to see his father because Ian doesn't really remember his father because he was so small. He was like an infant when that happened, and so you see Barley's biggest regret is he only has 3 memories, where you later find out there's actually 4, and it's not a pleasant memory.
No.
And so you realize that happens, so you realize that he gains an arc. It's kind of an interesting way to do a story because they're both going to the same quest to meet their father. You originally start with Ian, who wants to meet his father so that he can do things like be like his father and be more confident and do things like that, play catch, do stuff like that. And eventually that changes because he's gaining that with his brother, and then his brother is the one who remembers his father way more because he was so much older, and so then you gain that thing at the end where he gets to see and kind of close that loop. So it's like a really interesting way to do a story,
and and especially that Barley, he needs that closure because he hasn't grown up. I understand that he's a young guy, but he's been stuck in a fantasy world for all of his life.
Yes.
Now he's always been there for his brother, and that's amazing. And that's the journey. That's the thing that Ian needs to discover. But you're right. There is a point where their arcs interlap, and then they sort of cross over and sort of swap places. So I thought the story was really clever.
Yeah.
But and even though I agree with it completely, and as I was watching it, I was like, okay, he's definitely not going to have a chance to meet his father. I was really hoping that they could have a conversation. I'm glad it didn't happen that way, but there's part of me, there's the sentimental part that wishes, it would have been great had they somehow gotten another 24 hours. But that wasn't what, that's the thing that Ian needed to find out. That's not what the journey ultimately is about.
Yeah. And I feel like, I honestly feel like the story writers and the creators of this story, I feel like they had a really hard time and really thought this through a lot to try to figure out how to do that ending scene and how this movie ends. I feel like because that story, the story could go exactly the same, but can have dramatically different endings in the last, 5 minutes. It could be completely different. That could happen. They could get another 24 hours. They could do it this way. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was on the table at one point in time.
Right, yeah.
But what they came to the conclusion with is they decided to go, well, Barley's the one that really needs to talk to him, and then he passes on a nugget from the father to Ian at the end of the movie. And I think that that's also symbolic.
Yes.
Where he's the father figure that he's had this whole time, and having his brother tell him what his father said, I thought it was really cool too. It's really interesting. But I mean, we kind of got off track here, but to get back to what you were talking about how you have a point that you don't really like Barley at the beginning of this movie.
Yeah.
I would have to agree. I think you grow to like him more as this movie goes by, and I think it was done on purpose. I think they wanted to hide that other storyline in the dark through the first few movies, for the first part of the movie, so you kind of don't even get Barley. You don't really like him. He's just there, and he's kind of annoying, and
right, yeah.
But I think it's important in terms of I think they did it on purpose because they're hiding that arc. And then when they interlap, that's when that arc, they start to interlap a little bit when they take that stop, and after he basically has that dramatic scene where he, as long as he tells the truth, he doesn't transform back. But then you have him where he actually feels like his brother's a screw up, and so that's a lie when he says that he doesn't think he's a screw up. And so you get that's, I think right there is when it starts to blur, where both arcs start to blur together, and then they move away from each other after that, and then you get the different arc. And so I think that transition happens in that scene where you kind of care about Barley a little bit more, because he has this emotional reaction. He's just kind of well, you think I'm just a screw up, and it's just kind of this. It's a little jarring when it happens, but I think it's important for that character to finish his arc.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as any other quirks go, I don't know if I have. I'm hoping I can find some as we talk about. So this might be a little bit of a different. A little bit of a different. Maybe we should roll into likes and just see.
Yeah. Let's just roll into likes and then see what happens. Because I mean, I had quite a few things that I liked, and that's why a lot of the stuff that we've talked about is what I've liked about this movie. Is I like how the story is clever. I like how it overlaps, and I like how they have different arcs, but it's a very strange. I'm trying to think of a movie where I've seen this before, and I just can't for the life. We've seen thousands of movies, so
right.
I cannot think of another movie where I've seen two characters have different arcs at the beginning, overlap, and then complete in different directions. It has this weird, it's not even an X pattern. It's almost like this weird Y pattern. So they kind of start on the same goal, but then they blur and then diverge, and yet still kind of meet together at the end. It's really strange. And I thought it was just really clever and really creative. So all of that I really enjoyed. I thought it was so interesting to have this kind of story come to be. And the having that brotherly message of him being like a father figure I thought was just kind of an interesting way to do the story, because it's a lot of these times you don't get stories like this, especially in terms of when you're thinking of animation. A lot of the stuff you equate things to Disney and like a Disney princess, and then the movie that we did earlier this year with Frozen 2, and even with Frozen, it's a story about sisters. And so having this kind of weird story that's about brothers was interesting. And I just thought it was kind of cool to how they did this. The only other thing I could say is I really enjoyed the world that they created. I thought everything was just like having this like suburban version of like a fantasy world it's a very, to me, a very Pixar type thing. It's sort of like having Monsters Inc.
Right, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's like this twist of a world where instead of where like monsters, in order to power their world, they have to scare humans. And so you're just kind of like, and then you have this other thing where they're just like 9-to-5ers, you know, these monsters are just doing their job type of thing. And having that sort of feeling, I think, is the exact same feeling you have for this movie in terms of how they created this world. It's a very, very Pixar type movie. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's just kind of, that's how I felt about it. It feels like a Pixar movie. And I think that's a good thing, especially when you have movies like The Good Dinosaur, which doesn't feel like a Pixar movie, which I would arguably say that that's the worst one they've ever done. So it's just been interesting. I thought this was a very cool way to like interpret this, and to have something along with this, to have something like the unicorns being just like these, like, they're almost like rats in this movie.
So something about
like,
the unicorns is that Jessa, my little peanut, she was so enamored with them when you see them in the opening sequence, because they're regular unicorns.
They're regular
She's
unicorns.
Like, oh. Yep. And then how they were acting, she was just like, oh my, like, it was the total opposite. And I was like, God damn it. You know, at least it's not being in a movie theater with a bunch of kids who are crying because Marvel killed off a bunch of superheroes that you know they're just going to bring back.
Well, yeah.
In part 2. Like, it wasn't that, but it was kind of, just for like a minute, I was like, oh, freaking Pixar, man. Like, that's so clever, but still.
Yes, it's really clever, and here's the thing. This is the time period where you have different animation houses, and the reason why they're able to share space is because they're all doing things slightly differently. Pixar has absolutely, for most of its inception, has been making movies for adults that kids can see. As opposed to, you see, like, DreamWorks, where it seems like they make more of, like, a blur of both. Like, you can get kids and adults to see this movie. And then you have something like Illumination Entertainment, who's now overtaken part of this industry, to where their movies, they're doing like kids movies that adults can see. You know, it's like that thing. And I feel like they all know this, and I think they keep doing that. And every time one of them shifts any other direction, that movie doesn't do well. So I feel like that's the thing that they've been doing really well, is like Illumination is like a really successful animation house. They have a huge chunk of the market, and I think they've made most of the money by now, which is shocking because it hasn't been around that long. But to have like these Minions and Despicable Me, this whole franchise has made a crap ton. It's made billions of dollars,
right.
And those are definitely kids movies. Those are all kids movies that adults can happen to like see and enjoy. But then when you get like DreamWorks, I think varies. I think they blur. They go side to side more often. They're a gray, and I think they move from right to left. But I feel like every time that DreamWorks does a movie that's closer towards kids, that movie doesn't do very well. But this is the problem with like it's a clever idea, but obviously you're gonna have a bunch of little girls that are gonna be upset that unicorns are basically rats, and they're like vermin.
Yeah, and they're nasty too. I mean,
they're
and it's great. Really, it's great. But still, I mean,
it is.
Like,
it really is.
Pixar.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's great. Oh, all right. What other likes you got?
Okay. So I have to tell you, probably the hardest I laughed. Well, okay. I'll start with something small. I loved all the references to Lord of the Rings, to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep,
to
great.
Magic the Gathering. I thought that those
Magic.
were great.
Yeah.
So as someone who's played Magic, who's played a little bit of D&D,
yeah,
I love all those references.
Yeah, it's great.
There were some things that I thought were so cool and so funny and clever, but I think the best scene for me is when Barley sends Guinevere off to her death, and all those parking tickets come out, and it's like thousands of parking tickets, and they come out of both windows looking like wings, and she flies off to, like, I was just like, oh my god, that's so perfect, and suddenly you love Barley. I was like, oh my god.
Yep.
Suddenly I love Barley. Like, he's willing to do anything to get this done.
Yep,
for his brother. And that is just
I think
so
that is
hilarious.
the scene. Yeah, I think that's the scene where the audience fully comes around.
It's like, oh my god, this is great.
Yep.
This movie has my undivided attention now.
Oh man.
I'll watch this every time to get to this ridiculous scene. And I mean, there's so many, there's just other things too, where I think the other big laugh we got was, when the dragon forms and it takes on that really silly smiley face.
The silly smile.
I mean, that's so great, and what a cool character design, and of course it destroys the school, and it would be a real dragon instead of what dragons have become, and no one would have any idea how to deal with the damn thing, except there's, the one spell that Ian hasn't been able to do. So yes. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think pay off for me, and I love that little fight scene at the end where he's using everything that he's learned. Like,
everything.
He uses everything to buy his brother time. So
it's basically his full arc into becoming essentially a wizard.
Right.
It's cool. It's really cool.
So
it's great.
How about you?
Anything else?
I'm sure, but I need to watch it again, and I will watch it again now that it's.
I'll definitely watch this movie again, man. And another thing that I wanted to bring up is how I like the idea for somebody who, I mean, this is definitely for people who's worked in like with the general public, but even just having the Manticore have this like family restaurant, it just like lose it and accidentally sets the damn place on fire. is pretty good. It's pretty good. And I like how she, like, which would be really interesting, because like, how is there not just like, because in this world, how is there not just like ridiculous lawsuits, but she ends up just like reopening the store into like a regular family restaurant again.
So I'm so glad you said that. So that brings up another thing, which it's a movie, right? Okay, there are usually not consequences for things like because I went back and I watched the first Ant-Man, and Scott Lang should have spent at the end of that movie. He should have spent years in prison for what he does, and it's one of those things where I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back on it, I was like, oh my god, like how is he not in jail? How is he not in prison for breaking out of jail the way that he did? Like everyone knew that he broke out. It wasn't like some secret. So that got me. So anyway, that reminded me of the fact that they essentially assaulted this pawn shop owner and took the sword from her. And, and the thing that I really would have loved, because I thought this too when it happened. I thought for sure she killed that old lady. I was just like, oh my god, I can't believe they did that. I can't believe she just killed an old lady. And then no, she's just paralyzed. I'm like, well, it looked like he killed her. I mean, it was animated in a way that looked like she was dead. But that never, ever gets talked about again. That's just like one of those little things where it's like, you know, sometimes this is how we roll in an enchanted land. We're not that far away from going back to how things are, I guess.
You know what's interesting about that shopkeep? Do you know who plays the pawn shop?
No, owner? I don't.
Tracy Ullman plays the pawn shop owner, right?
Okay, all right.
So Tracy Ullman is the one who plays that character. And then the thing that brings me to the fact that what I thought was really interesting before this movie even started is you get an animated short. And I don't know if you did you watch this in theaters?
No.
So the animated short before it doesn't happen. You didn't see it.
No.
The animated short before it is a Simpsons short.
Oh,
it starts with what looks to be Mickey Mouse, but it's actually Homer holding two donuts above his head. And then you realize it's now a Simpsons animated short. And so it's this really cute little short with like Maggie Simpson trying to she goes to a play area and meets this other little kid that she likes. But she went with Marge, and the next time she goes with Homer, who keeps going to these ridiculous ones that are just not even for kids her age. And so it's like all this ridiculous stuff. So she's trying to get back to this kid. It's like a really cute short. But I thought it was interesting that Tracy Ullman was in this, and you also have the Simpsons short before it, which I thought was really interesting.
You wonder, is that a coincidence? Or just like a happy coincidence?
I find it hard to believe that it would be a coincidence, but it is. I mean, what was the last time you've seen Tracy Ullman in anything?
I mean, her voice very easily could have been added later.
Oh
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. So I mean, and usually Pixar does do scratch audio for everything, but a lot of times their own, it is their own people who end up in the final
usually
thing. But that needed, that's one of those parts that needed a bit more of a performance. So
it did.
I mean, it's weird. I didn't recognize her.
I mean, there's no way you would have recognized her. Because it's Tracy Ullman. I mean, she's a sketch comedian. I mean, she could do so many different things. She's really talented in that aspect. She was the one that had a successful sketch show during the height of SNL. I mean, like a sketch variety show. So it's definitely an interesting thing. So let's go ahead and rate this thing, man. Please. So I think it's obvious, but I say see it. I think this is definitely a movie. I enjoyed the world. I enjoyed the message. I enjoyed everything about this movie. This is the reason why this podcast was a little weird. Quirks were hard. Quirks were really hard for this movie because I thought they did everything really well and everything was really clever. And every little problem I have with it is so minor. So I say, see it. You can't go to the theaters, but if you have Disney Plus, I say go see it. It's great. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Disney Plus it. You know, I mean, this is it's weird. I would have to really look at the catalog and probably rewatch some movies, but this is definitely one of my favorite Pixar ones. So
it's good.
I don't know where I'd rank it, but I remember thinking, yeah, this is probably my favorite one right now. I don't, you know, I really need to look at all of them and make that determination.
I mean, they have a huge catalog.
I think Soul is I don't know if that's gonna drop this year or not.
Man, I highly doubt it's gonna drop this year.
But it would be an interesting conversation for us to have, going back in and looking at the complete catalog.
Yeah, it would be interesting to do that. I mean, they have a huge catalog, and I can't. I mean, there's so many of Pixar movies that I just thoroughly love,
right?
And so it'd be really hard to rank these movies because there's so many good ones. You know, I can definitely rank the bad ones; those are easy. I mean, Cars 2 and The Good Dinosaur are definitely the lower end of the movies, but the rest of their movies are just so good, so it'd be tough to rank all of those. But all right, let's go ahead and sign out, man. So if anybody wants to contact us, you always have us at halfpastpodcast.com.
Like us on Facebook.
We are on iTunes, Google Play, and of course Spotify.
We're on Libsyn, Stitcher, and TuneIn.
You see, it's been a while for you.
I don't have it in front of me. I could have pulled up an old one, but no, I got it.
You can always email us at halfpastcast@gmail.com. That's halfpastcast@gmail.com.
Tweet us at halfpastpodcast.
I don't even think I look at that Twitter account anymore. I want to thank everybody for listening.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone, for your support. This has been a fun podcast. It was good talking to my buddy again.
Yes,
it's been a while
absolutely.
during this quarantine process.
I think we're going to find an excuse to talk again on a podcast real soon, and I think I'm going to send you an outline.
All right,
for
cool.
Star
the other
Wars.
thing, awesome. We should definitely do that. And while we're in this, I don't know how long this quarantine process is going to last, but there are so many movies that they've, like, pushed, you know, like Fast and Furious got pushed, and Black Widow got pushed, and, like, all of these really big budget type movies all got pushed into, like, next year because of this whole thing. And so I don't know how long this is going to last and how many podcasts we're going to get out. But I'll have to say that I think this is a good time that you and I can start doing some really ridiculous makeup podcasts. Just like these random movies from the past, like, 5 years.
That is a great idea.
From the past, like, 5 years, we've definitely missed a lot of podcasts. And I would like to just start, you know, picking that together and see if we can't just, like, release all these really weird ones during quarantine.
Okay. Awesome. That sounds good.
All right. This is the Half Past Podcast. I'm Graham Ricks.
Jonesy.
See you next flick.